Good morning. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a terrific weekend. I know I did, especially as I finished the weekend looking over your specific purpose statements. I really like a lot of these topic choices. A lot of them are with, regular, well-known issues, but a lot of you are going, above and beyond. There's certain things that you feel strongly about and would like all of us to feel strongly about it too. And I really think they're going to be excellent speeches. But now don't forget, you needed to get those specific purpose statements to me last night because it was a 15-point assignment. And remember, you can't deliver a speech until I give you an okay on the specific purpose statement. And also make sure, if you are still sending them in, if you haven't sent them in yet, they have to be phrased correctly. That's why I sent you the assignment sheet. That's why I sent you 4 sample outlines. Okay? Make sure you're phrasing your statement correctly. So now let's go ahead and move on. Now I had said, and as you can see from the sample outlines, pretty much things are going to be the same as they were for the informative speech. The way you organize the outline, the way, different ideas for an attention gainer or a conclusion or 2 main points of what kind of outlined, format that you choose. But there's going to be one significant difference. Because now you're looking to influence your audience. You're looking to get people to think the way you do, feel the way you do, share the same idea, or actually get people to do something you want them to do. Well, in order to do that, you have to establish a believability. A believability in the eyes of your audience that who you are and what you're saying is true, or is right, or is correct. And in order to do that, you must establish in the eyes of your audience your credibility. All right? Credibility is key to a persuasive speech. Credibility is key to influencing your audience. To get them, by the end of your speech, to think and feel the way you do, or to actually get them to do something you want them to do. Now, in your textbook, they talk about 3 types of credibility, and I'm kind of going in a little bit of disorder, but I'm going to hit all 3 of them. Now, the first type of credibility they talk about is establishing credibility based on competency, or competent credibility. Now, there's 3 key terms that go with establishing competent credibility, and that is the wisdom, authority, and or knowledge that a speaker demonstrates about that particular topic. That then establishes competent credibility. I'll give you a great example. Let's say you're at a Saturday barbecue, all right, and you've got something with your car that's not really working well, all right, yet your best friend's brother-in-law, all right, is a mechanic. Now, he doesn't live near you, but he does know some of the mechanics in your area. So you immediately go to him and say, hey, listen, I got this thing. I think it's my transmission. I'm not sure. Who should I go to? And he's going to probably say, you know what? Go to the Shell station on Main Street. That guy, Jack, is really good and knows what he's doing. So what are you going to do? You go ahead and you take it to Jack at that station on Main Street. Why? Because your best friend's brother-in-law, in your eyes, has competent credibility. He's a damn good mechanic. You know he's a good mechanic, and you know that he would point you in the right direction of someone who's going to best help you with what's wrong with your car. All right? That's competent credibility. Let me give you another example. Okay? You're sitting in front of a screen right now watching me. Instead of being at an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday job, you're taking college courses. You're working towards getting an associate or a bachelor's degree. Why? Well, because someone, when you were in grammar school or high school, someone sat with you, or you happened to watch someone on TV or listen to someone who spoke to you about the importance of education, and that's why you're sitting in front of a computer screen watching me on this video right now. Okay? Now, I'm standing in front of you as a professor of communication. This is my 22nd year at Bergen Community College. I'm now the chair of the communication department. Okay? Longtime faculty member, sat on the faculty senate, longtime union leader, chair of the Veterans Committee here on campus. Yet, neither one of my parents went to college. Hell, my father never even finished high school. So, how am I here? Well, it had to do with my dad. Now, when I say key terms being wisdom, authority, and our knowledge, it's not that my dad knew what it was like to have a college degree. It was actually the opposite. See, my dad dropped out of high school, dropped out of Dickinson High School in Jersey City after his sophomore year, and realized probably not the best idea. So when he was 18 years old, he went in the Navy. Never got his that alternate degree. Never got it. But after the Navy, he went to work for a trucking company. And he worked at one for 20 years till it went out of business. And then he worked for another one until he retired. Another 18 or 19 years. So he worked about 39 years in the trucking industry. And my dad had a very good reputation. At that first company, he had risen to terminal manager. And then he was a dispatcher and then chief of dispatch or something like that. Operations manager at the second company he went to. There was only one problem. Because of his education level, he was only going to rise so far. And as the years went by, as he got into his 40s, his 50s, and then his 60s, he would stay here while others would go. Why? Because they were educated. They were younger and they were well educated. They had good, solid degrees and good education. So as I was growing up, my dad would always tell me, get your education. Get your education. It's going to open up. And one of the things that he taught me was, your education will open up your opportunities, which of course it did. I do this job, now I have to because now with a house and children, family and all, car payments, all that stuff. Of course you got to go to work. But I chose this. It didn't choose me. Before this, I worked in morning radio and I could have done that for a career. I love that. I just decided not to go that path. And getting the communications degree or the master's degree really opened up. I could have gone into public relations. I could have gone into television. There was all kinds of things I could have done. So when I look at myself standing in front of you right now, the reason why I'm here today is because of my father. Because when he talked to me about the importance of education, I looked at him. And his credibility was based on his wisdom, authority, and our knowledge about what it's like to not have a degree. Now let's move on to the second type. Because sometimes you may have competent credibility, but people don't know it. So you go ahead and you're able to influence them in another way. And the way you do that is based on charisma. Someone who is a charismatic speaker. Now there's 4 key terms that go with someone who demonstrates charisma as their credibility. And that's appealing, concerned, enthusiastic, and sincere. And it's 1, 2, 3, or a combination of all 4 of those to where someone could influence you based on their charisma. Okay? Probably the best example I can give you, okay, is when I was growing up. First, as you could probably tell, I'm 55 years old, and still I have a chest that's slightly larger than a normal male's chest. Well, there's a reason for that. As I was growing up, 10, 11, 12 years old, got picked on a little bit. I was short, I was chunky. And then I started to get into Pop Warner football. By the time I got to 8th grade, I had gotten a little taller, and I started both ways on the Pop Warner football team in 8th grade. Went into freshman football, did pretty good. So I was doing okay. Well, right around the time I started freshman football, HBO had a movie on. It was a movie that was now about 1.5 years, 2 years old. I had heard about it, didn't see it in the theaters, but I saw it on HBO. And what it was a documentary. And as a 14-year-old, I sat and watched it. I was mesmerized. Now, I had heard of the guy who was the focus of the documentary. And I had seen him once or twice, but this documentary really focused on him, what he was like, and what he could do. And what the focus of this documentary was this man, who they focused on, was now going for his final championship in the world of bodybuilding, the Mr. Universe pageant. And he was the single most charismatic person I've ever seen in my life. This was going to be his 6th win, which he did win. before he retired. And there was just something about him. Number one, he was bigger than everybody else. He worked out harder than anybody else. But what's more, he was the most cocky and self-assured son of a bitch I'd ever seen in my life. Now, I couldn't really say his last name. Schwarzenegger, I didn't matter. I knew his first name. And his first name was Arnold. And after seeing that movie, I had my dad buy me a bench, got me some weights, started going after school. When football season was over, I didn't wrestle, so I went right into the weight room. And even if you go to my YouTube page, the first video I ever posted from 5 years ago, as a promo for an upcoming event for the veterans, we were raising money for the veterans. Look at how much money I'm bench pressing at the age of 50. Where did that come from? It all came from Arnold Schwarzenegger. When I saw that movie in 1979, it influenced me greatly. So that even up until a couple of years ago, I was still always going to the gym and pumping the iron and the big chest and the shoulders and everything else. It was all due to being influenced by this self-assured, cocky, I'm going to win, doesn't matter what you do type of guy, and that was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that's influencing based on charisma. Now there's one more type where you can influence people just simply by who you are. Just who you are and who you're known to be, you're able to influence people. And that's based on character. That just simply who you are helps to influence people. One of my favorite examples goes way back to the early 1970s. Now, there was a guy who in New York was revered. He was revered for decades. He was a baseball player. One of the best baseball players ever. But what's more, he was also an Italian American at a time when Italian Americans were so discriminated against that some Italians would change their last name in order to make it. As a matter of fact, if you ever Google the name Bob Grant was a host on WOR radio in New York City for like 55 years. Yet his real last name is not Grant, because when he first broke into business, they weren't letting Italians get on. So he had to change his Italian last name to Grant. Well, anyway, so this guy was revered in the New York City area. But 2 decades after he retired and wasn't really doing anything. He was actually like a third base coach for the new Oakland A's, who had just moved to Oakland from Kansas City. So one day, a bank was opening up in New York City. And they wanted to compete with Chase Manhattan and Chemical Bank and all these other great big banks. And they didn't know what they were going to do. Well, they decided to get this guy as their spokesperson. So all of a sudden, one day in 1970, whether you were watching TV, listening to the radio, opening up a newspaper or a magazine in the New York City area, all of a sudden you saw, "Hi, I'm Joe DiMaggio, and for the best return on your investment, think this bank." Well, 2 weeks later, that bank was exploding. And people were going to Chase Manhattan and closing their accounts and taking them over to this bank. And people were like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I need to close my account and go over to that bank." "Well, why are you going to that bank?" "Well, because Joe D said so." And people were literally, by the hundreds of thousands, changing over to this bank simply because Joe DiMaggio said so. Well, another company sees what's happening and says, "We need you." And sure enough, starting in 1972 and for 11 straight years, you could turn on a TV no matter where you were in America, no matter what channel it was, and during the commercial breaks, you would say, "Hi, folks, I'm Joe DiMaggio, and for the best tasting coffee every morning, get yourself a Mr. Coffee." And I'm telling you right now, people, automatic drip coffee makers had just come out, and there were about 5 or 6 companies that had a brand, or that had a product. Yet that Mr. Coffee, and throughout the 70s, you go to anybody's kitchen, and they always had a Mr. Coffee on the kitchen shelf, or on the kitchen counter. And it was the #1 automatic drip coffee maker all 11 years. He was the spokesman. All right, and people would buy that coffee maker simply because of Joe D. Well, that leads into my other example, the one that just totally amazes me. is that some of you, if you're up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you're flipping through cable channels, you'll see a lot of infomercials. Infomercials help bring money to these cable companies so they don't have to go off the air. And they're usually pretty inexpensive. I mean, you're talking 3 to 3:30 in the morning. You're not going to charge somebody a whole lot of money. So people will take up the entire half hour. Well, for years, some of the best known products, of course, were, the Juice Maker by Jack LaLanne, or the hair products by Cher, the singer. But over the last 20 years, one of the best-selling products in the history of infomercials is an exercise machine. And now one guy has been with every single one of the infomercials that have been made for this exercise machine. And it is one of the best-selling products in the history of infomercials. Why? Because Chuck Norris is in the commercial. And you know why it sells? Because Chuck Norris is 81 years old and can still kick everybody's ass. So when people see Chuck Norris saying, hey, I use this every day and it helps me to stay in shape, well, boom, all of a sudden people are going online. Homegym.com. I'm getting that gym. Oh, absolutely. Why are you buying that gym? Well, look at Joe. Look at, Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris uses it. It must be good. And he literally influences people to be able to buy this product. As a matter of fact, I have it in my textbook. I don't have it with me right now, but several years ago, after talking about this in class, a student gave to me, he printed out all these Chuck Norris things. And it's absolutely hysterical to show you how influential Chuck Norris is. What was it? Chuck Norris was once pulled over by a cop, and the cop got off with a warning. Chuck Norris and Superman fought on a bet, and the loser had to wear his underwear on the outside of his pants. I mean, it's just all kinds of things. Just all different Chuck Norris things. Funny stuff. But yeah, absolutely. Based on charisma is a big reason why when people see Chuck Norris, by character, simply because of who Chuck Norris is, he establishes credibility based on character, and people simply buy the product because Chuck Norris says so. All right, that's credibility. You now have your assignment. It's attached to this video. Enjoy, and we will talk to you later on this week.